what we know for the last few weeks is there's been tensions within the transitional government, which is a component of the military aspect, but also the civilian uh, coalition. And over the last few weeks, this has led to protests in the east, but also in other parts of the country. I would say that this has largely taken place earlier, not just in the last month. So what we did see is when the civilian component of the transitional government had called for aspects of security personnel to be under the civilian control, that did lead to some tensions. And so what we are seeing is that fragmentation between the two main groups coming apart and the transitional agreement, as it were, falling apart. What we have heard in the last hour is that the military leader, in this case Al-Burhan, has dissolved the transitional military government, and officially the military now are now in charge of the country. That means that the transitional agreement that was in place is no longer up for grabs, but it means that Sudan's transition, as it were, is in a fragile state, more so than it was 18 to 24 months ago.
Yeah, which in fact was yet another coup, really, essentially another return to military control. Is it the fact that the military do not want to not be the dominant player in what is happening in Sudan?
Well, I would say that the military were a dominant player. In actual fact, if you look at analysis that has been done, you'll find that the civilians still were underneath the military, and to a large extent we're trying to maneuver through the military structures that were put in place 30 years ago. I think a lot of this has been due to the transitional period, as in this was now the time that the civilians were taking over of the country, which would have meant that the prime minister would have had overall control and that the military would assume a secondary role for the next few months. And I think this has brought tensions up front. But also, as I said, it's a large part of this was triggered when the suggestion was that the security personnel, security apparatus should sit underneath the civilian components.
Yeah.
And this has exacerbated some of the tensions that exist.
Yes, indeed. We've seen people taking to the streets. I mean, this has been, you know, such a hard-fought battle for civilians to have some form of democracy, some form of security. Is this likely to spark violence on the streets?
I think it will do, and we are hearing signs of that. Colleagues and friends of mine that I've spoken to, who I've managed to get hold of, have said that there have been some protests which have been clamped down by various segments of security forces, in this case the RSF. And so we will see more likely push in this direction, particularly because the Sudanese people are resilient and they do want the civilian component. Or should I say a large majority of civilians want a civilian-led government. And so that friction between the military supporters and the protesters that are supporting civilians will continue to clash. But also, as the military try to get a control of the situation on the ground, we will likely see more clashes and violence that is not, or maybe to the levels of what we saw a few months, if not 24 months ago.
Yeah. Do you feel now the Prime Minister and the ministers that were part of this transitional government are not going to have any chance of coming back? Were they capable of bringing any stability to the country?
Well, I think what they were largely good at was trying to bring together various aspects of the agreement. And this, what I mean by this is there seems to be a lot of announcements to move things forward. They were able to move Sudan off the terror list and able to bring forth some economic reforms that would help support Sudan's transition. However, I think where they've been lacking is not just converting some of the rhetoric and the policy into substance, but also trying to enshrine these things in law. And that's where they have ultimately failed, or I would say have been stumbled when it comes to the military engagement. Unfortunately, I don't see that changing, and I can't see there being any signs of it going back to what it was. I think what we will see, as we see in other parts of Africa, of the African continent, is that you will see more military taking over, because that seems to be now the trend of the last few months. So I'm talking here of, South Sudan, of Mali, Chad, and Guinea, where we have seen coups and where there's these sort of fake, I would argue, transitional agreements that actually don't hold, and actually where the military consumes most of the power, but then says it's a transitional agreement. So I think that's where we will see things heading in Sudan. It's unfortunate because of all the millions and billions of money that has gone into it the last 18 months. But unfortunately, the power dynamics being what they were, it was always going to lead to this sort of situation.